Welcome back. If you've recently heard about the CMMC Phase 2 suspension, this session specifically for you. As the CEO at Valor, we are focused on helping the entire ecosystem through the work that our clients and partners get to do to protect the defense mission and deliver on those promises. And this suspension is a big test for the ecosystem. And as an organization, we look for inspiring stories. As a professional baseball player, I bring story into my business, into my daily life. And when you look out into the ecosystem on inspiring stories that you can strive to follow the blueprint of, Chuck Coxhead at Coaxis came to mind and graciously agreed to join us on this session to talk about kind of what his approach was, what he's learned, but also how he continues to stay the course when these types of changes happen. So Chuck, good morning, and thanks so much for joining us.
Good morning, Greg. Yeah, it's been a heck of a journey. I got to tell you, this entire the entire process from when I initially learned about the requirement, which I would say was years ago, to what it's evolved, and my discovery over the past couple of years has been frankly mind-blowing. It's been, I mean, I feel like I'm on a trip sometimes, but and then bam, we get this massive surprise from Department of War, and wow, my mind's blown.
Yeah, it's definitely surprising. Chuck, just for the audience that does not know what Coaxis does, can you talk a little bit about the type of work you do and the role it plays in the defense mission? I think that'd be helpful for the audience to get a perspective into that.
So we make Ready 48 custom RF cables. What that means is we make custom RF cables for high frequency electronics, primarily in the defense space, but not exclusively in the defense space. And we make them fast. That is really our business model, and frankly, it's our mission. And the last thing we would want to happen is for someone to break a cable, lose a cable, measure wrong, count wrong, and then a system not be operational for a war fighter. I mean, speaking for myself, that really is my mission. I really believe that we make sure that men and women come home safe. We do it through a tiny little thing called an RF cable, but that is so much a part of our business and mission critical. If right now, with the Department of War is so hell-bent on accelerating weapons programs and munitions and that sort of thing in a time of need and a real need, nothing beats speed. And fortunately, we're up to the challenge of being able to do that because we really do see it as critical.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, a common thread I hear throughout how you guys do business, how you've approached these requirements, and then ultimately the clarity of mission of how it actually impacts the end user, I think is so important. And is a common thread that, I've picked up since meeting you. And, I feel like you lead from the front. I know you have a podcast called Our Frontiers that I was thankful to come on and speak to the audience. But when you think about your supply chain, so getting that RF cable, up to the airplane, the defense vehicle, whatever that end use is, what do you think about when you think about RF frontiers, like being a frontier in the manufacturing of these, RF pieces, parts, and services?
So it's about the innovation comes from small companies, frankly. It could be innovation of product. It could be innovation of business model. It could be innovation of customer experience, which is incredible. If it weren't for that kind of innovation, if it weren't for the kind of agility, if it weren't for, again, speed, if it weren't for that kind of customer experience that keeps people believing that we reduce their schedule and reduce their risk, frankly, you'd be stuck working with bloated, slow, behemoth companies. And I just believe that, whether it be the prototype process or whether it be an emergency situation or an all hands on deck situation, such as typically occurs during times of conflict, I just think that I chose the name RF Frontiers for the podcast for a reason. We are on the forefront of being able to make sure that we provide that. Yes, the product itself is commoditized and boring, frankly.
Yeah.
But where it goes is incredible. What it does and what it enables is incredible. Things that I can't even begin to elucidate, but radar and signal jamming and signals intelligence and communication with drones, be they be air drones, sea drones, whatever, ground drones, whatever it might be. It supports the warfighter with equipment on his or her back. Somebody's got to be out there leading and interested in doing that stuff and doing it in a way that the customer ultimately needs, wants, and desires, so that people come home from safe. And I believe that companies that are small, fast, and agile like us are the ones that are able to provide in that situation. So and I'm not going to change.
Yeah. Yeah. No, they absolutely are. I mean, it's critical infrastructure, and you've seen releases of budget numbers and things that are focused on making sure defense manufacturing is ready for a potential uptick. And obviously along that, acquisition reform that came out and all of these, new budget items and things of that nature, cybersecurity requirements, pop up and have been kind of real in the ecosystem since 2017, but have gotten more and more real with, the pausing of the program that has shocked so many. I think it's made a lot of people fear the audit. It's made a lot of people unsure of what to do next. I'm curious the journey that you've been through since you first heard of, NIST 800-171 or CMMC, as a defense manufacturer, delivering on a daily basis, converting on contracts, winning contracts, getting renewals. How has this hit you as a general manager, and how has this hit you as somebody who's looking at the overall strategy of a defense manufacturer in this state?
So when I first learned about it years ago, it was, oh, okay, this makes sense. I get it. It's cyber hygiene, right? It's important, but it didn't feel real. It didn't connect to my mission. But 10 years ago, it wasn't as prevalent in the mind as it is in 2026. And I thought I understood. And it turns out I didn't understand. So and of course things progressed slowly at first. And then, they began to add little more to it, a little more to it, a little more to it, and still didn't fully quite grasp how serious it was. And of course that was, that was started out as a checklist, and then an NIST that came from an NIST standard. And then came the audit. And frankly, a lot of people were caught off guard. Our company was caught off guard. I started speaking of this thing called CMMC 2.0. And at first, people didn't believe me here. And part of the reason they didn't believe me is that, we're level tier 3 or tier 4 supplier. It's the reason why we have to do this is because we've received customer drawings. In truth, you can't do much with those drawings. It's assembly instructions for a set of catalog components that get assembled together. You could give this thing to someone that alone, there's nothing they can do with it. It could look like one that is done by a commercial customer. There's not really a lot of difference, but it's export controlled, and it is controlled on classified information, and we have to do what we have to do. But again, it's that whole, really? It's cable assembly. Yeah. But slowly but surely, I convinced the company, it's like, this is real. This is important. The customers began to percolate louder and louder and louder and louder. And then after the announcement was made in 2025, the end of 2025, it's like, this became real. Like, this is an existential crisis. You get on board, you do what you need to do, or frankly, you're going to lose a massive amount of revenue. And we would have lost a massive amount of revenue. We have been fortunate. The company is very well off. We are, debt free. We don't need to worry about any of those things. But we would have lost a massive amount of revenue and been faced with an existential crisis. So I got everybody on board and they began to believe me. And frankly, Trust But Verify, the owner of their company, went out and did some verifications. Holy mackerel, this is real. Yeah, it's real.
Yeah.
And so we're also blessed that we're able to afford what it takes to execute this unfunded mandate. I fear for the folks that are going through the same journey that I've been going through. Hopefully, maybe they realized it sooner than I did, that they're in a position to be able to rise to the challenge, because I don't want them to go through an existential crisis, but I do fear that that is the case. And now with the announcement, I mean, one of my favorite sayings is that economics always wins. It may not win in the short term, but in the long term, it always wins. And I've sort of helped or believed that something would happen, but I didn't know what. I certainly didn't know when. And something did. Now, but this doesn't mean you put a full stop. My journey continues. So,
what's been the hardest part, or some momentum builders that have gotten you to a point where you're like, we're going to stay the course versus stop the engines and wait and see what happens after the 60 days?
Oh, the hardest part, frankly, is fear and distrust. I'm going to say it straight up. I'm not afraid of the Department of War. I'm afraid for future of the company. The tier one prime contractors, they are engines. They've never met a compliance item that they didn't adopt or like. They have the resources to do it. So, okay, just add it to the list. No problem. We can fund it. It's not a problem. Where a small company, that's just simply not the case. We have to carefully consider every single compliance item and see what we're going to implement. And we've weathered some of these storms before where they swore that we had to be a certain thing and say, no, you don't really need to be. So you really have to have a deep understanding, do your homework, and decide what's for you. But they think nothing of rolling those things out to us. Nothing. And the journey was, the journey was, you have till 2028. Now you have till 2020, third, fourth quarter, 2026. Holy mackerel. And the prime contractors tried to roll it out the first of the year of 2026. Whoa.
Yeah.
And then reality caught up. Economics always wins. And they said, well, sorry. They said, well, we're not going to give you any business. Well, then we can't accept your order because we're not compliant. Yeah. And they said, wait a minute, you can't accept our order. We thought we had more power than that. So, but they could flip that switch again tomorrow. And so I'm not taking a chance. I'm afraid.
Yeah. Economics always wins. I think that's what they're trying to figure out, because the economics weren't making sense across the ecosystem. I haven't seen one letter from a prime contractor, and we've all seen those letters that say November 2026 that say, here's a link to resources to help you implement this process. It's just like, you need to do it, signature, sign off, goodbye. Support is not there. And I think that's what one of our big line items in our response to the CMMC task force is, how are you taking accountability and providing support to these supply chains from tier 1 down to tier 7 or even further?
Well, it's an unfunded mandate. They happen all the time in compliance, and federal government dictates. From the prime contractor's perspective, they say, well, that's not us. Blame the Department of War. That's on them. But in everyday business, there are times when those prime contractors will invest in companies to get done what they need to get done. They will actually invest by spending money on capital and things like that to enable what they need, because they need the economics and return on investment to realize that mission, to enable and protect the warfighter. But not in this case. It's not on them. It's not, and I wouldn't want to either. It's Department of War, but The unfunded mandate basically came down from Department of War, ultimately Congress and the commander in chief, right? And so we just have to deal with it on our own.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would put my tax dollars to a small business, getting this accomplished and in place. But I'm only one person, and that's kind of what I do. My team and I at Valor each day is like try to give value to where we would put those dollars, and hopefully through this 60 days something comes out where it becomes a more funded band-aid, more funded unfunded band-aid, if that makes sense.
Yes,
To
it
make sure
does.
there's some more support, both valuable offerings, valuable resources, but also the ability to offer incentives or dollars to be able to go toward this implementation. So that's definitely our goal of what we want to see, out of these 60 days from the CMMC task force.
Well, I think about it much the same way, and I will tell you that 2-3 years ago, I wouldn't have wanted to give my tax dollars to something like this.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't fully understand. I understand the need for cyber hygiene. 100% I do. I think that can happen incrementally. But then there was something that kind of shook the ground beneath my feet. And that was the Anthropic LLM model. What do they call it? Mystic? I call it misery.
Yeah, misery.
And the reality, and in fact, it just came out this week. I don't know whether it was Anthropic or OpenAI, but one of them said that their model went rogue. It's in the news today. When I heard about that model being able to autonomously go out and essentially crack cyber systems, I was like, whoa, we are in a completely different world. We were in a different millennium, right? Back on, the turn of the century. Okay. We just entered an all new era again this year. And I don't just mean, the LLMs happened several years ago. This year, autonomous cyber cracking is a reality. This is now far more urgent than just cyber hygiene.
Mm-hmm.
And now I say, holy crap, I am willing to put my tax dollars to that because it could literally cripple the country and certainly cripple our defenses. So
Absolutely.
I'm in.
Yep. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's all supply chain, but it does, for a lot of people, they know they need to do it, but still don't do it. And I think one of the angles that we've seen make more people do it than would otherwise is intellectual property. If their company's building something
Sure.
that is proprietary, they really understand the architecture and then how vulnerable it is when they're building IP. And if they're not protecting it for IP, a lot of the other companies are just doing it because they want to check the box. And I think using that, using the dollar of protection across multiple areas, I think benefits the business. And you hit on that, beautifully, of how it actually impacts you and then the people that you serve, which needs to be clear at the end of the day. If you're going to actually spend time and money on an effort like this, is you have to have clarity. And it's like, how do we meet people where they're at to give them clarity? And like you said, it comes from a place of fear versus a place of freedom or more opportunity, or I see this as a way, if I spend $1, I can win more contracts. So we're really trying to shift that narrative. One of the things I think would be interesting to share is ways that your business was able to bake in some of the costs associated with getting ready into your business model, whether that's creating softwares that can save costs on vendor expenses, things of that nature. Some of the things you've done to kind of reallocate time and efforts to say this could eventually pay for itself in an ideal world.
So I think the biggest thing that we've done, I mean, yes, we actually write a ridiculous amount of software for such a small company. Most people would not expect it. But I think the biggest thing is that, frankly, the funds have to come from somewhere. And so because we've written our own software to handle pricing and among other things, it's a relatively easy switch for me to throw to say, okay, if this defense regulation is in a contracts for the customer, then we can throw the switch and provide for an incremental price increase, at the unit price level to be able to accommodate what is essentially a lot of additional overhead. Likewise, we do have commercial customers. And why should the commercial customers suffer? Yes, I get that in theory they benefit. I get all that. But we could achieve cyber hygiene at a lower cost level if we were only a commercial company, for sure. So again, because of the software, we're able to flip a switch relatively easily and track it at that level that says, okay, let's just add this as incremental, not a lot, just incremental, and just kind of capture it piece by piece by piece, so that we're whole at the end of the year. So that's probably the biggest thing. So, and now if I was sitting with my pencil and paper or my Excel spreadsheet and doing all this, manually, of course, yes, I can do something very, very similar. For us, we do it through software. And I started frankly, at the beginning of the year. And it made the change management easier. When I say that I'm presenting with, a 6-figure budget to get this done, well, I'm going to recoup costs from the people that are imposing it upon us, and that it goes all the way up to the Department of War via the supply chain. It's a lot easier to sell the expense.
Yeah, it's got to come from somewhere. I think that's a key point. Everybody knows, but they haven't thought through that equation. I'm curious, what you saw as the best way to get buy-in. Obviously, that strategy right there, we're going to recoup it through this avenue. But I know a lot of people listening in today, and there's a couple questions from the audience that we'll get to here in a moment. But how did you get buy-in, and how do you recommend, people in your position that are trying to do their best to champion this this change throughout their organization, throughout their manufacturing line, how they can get buy-in to get everybody on board?
Well, I think everyone is Missouri, the show me state. You got to be able to show facts and figures. And in our case, I can tell you straight up, one contract, estimated entry point is $3 million. You're not going to get it, Coaxis. Okay. That was a really easy one. But we also, our business is primarily high mix, low volume. So we actually get thousands of orders every year from hundreds of customers. It's a little more difficult, but it is relatively easy for me to add up and say, okay, all these things for which this applies. This would be revenue that they would then begin to try and award to somebody else. So that's relatively easy. But you can't just go on your say so. You've got to be able to show people facts on the ground. I'm getting emails from program managers say, "You're going to have this done?" I'm getting emails from buyers say, "You need to update your info in our portal, or I can't issue you a purchase order." That's the reality. The good news is they're literally providing me all the evidence I need to be able to do that. Because this is such a high profile issue. It's literally rippling across every single tier in the supply chain, every single one. I literally had a customer who called me and they were like, out of the blue, "So what are you doing this CMMC 2.0 thing?" I said, "Yeah, I am." And then we started sharing our journey. We really did. And we were using similar tools, and I think they were a little bit further ahead in the process than we are, but not a lot further ahead. They're a small company, kind of went through the same journey. So I think the good news is that everybody is marching in the same direction. So in that regard, as long as you can show people the reality, the fact that everybody's marching in that direction means that they're giving you plenty of opportunity and examples to show. I think the change management is easier. I do believe there'll be some people who are like, "Well, not me. I'm not doing this." Well, good for you. Let me know how that works out, because this has been deadly serious.
Yep. Yeah, there's always different crowds when things like this happen, and some people are complaining and saying, "I knew this was going to be gone, and I'm going to stop." And then, those are the ones that they reduce their likelihood of winning the contract or being able to adapt to the market as it changes. Chuck, before we get to the kind of final question here, we have a couple of questions from the audience because this is a live session. Let's see. He said, "What are the most common NIST ANR 171 implementation gaps you saw during your readiness process?"
Wow.
Implementation gaps.
I
Going
think,
from where you were
frankly,
to where you are.
yeah, frankly, it's configuration of the endpoints. For a small business, I mean, I'm not shy about it. We're very sophisticated for a very small company. Still could be a lot more sophisticated from an IT perspective, and software development, but there's still a lot of gaps. And so configuration of the endpoints and proper user control. I mean, I don't want a Microsoft server in my building. That said, I have servers in my building. They're very expensive. They're very difficult to manage. I need, people with special credentials to be able to manage them. So perhaps I'm jaded. Perhaps I'm wrong. I just don't want a Microsoft server in my building. Well, guess what? If you have the Microsoft server, it makes it a whole lot easier to do user authentication and all the stuff. The FIPS encryption for the, compliant on each of the endpoints, making sure that you're doing password rotation and all the different things on a regular basis. For a small company that doesn't want to invest in doing that the right way, guess what? It finds its way to the bottom of the line. You find yourself scrambling before the audit, and then you can't show a habit of doing it because guess what? You won't actually pass the audit in this case unless you actually show that you've been actually doing it on that periodic basis as you've written in your manual and your procedures. So unlike something else where, it might be an ISO 9001 audit or an AS 9100 audit where folks are familiar with and go, oh, well, we can scramble and cover the ground and make it up and they'll sweep our tracks behind so they don't know. Not in this one.
Yeah.
Not in this one. And you cannot be complacent. You have to address these things proactively. So we are scrambling, man. I mean, we are scrambling with this compressed timeline to get this done. Frankly, I'm nervous, but it is probably the biggest one. Yeah, I can put in new networking equipment. That's actually relatively easy. Yes, I'm going to, put new physical safeguards on the actual building. Yeah, that's actually pretty easy. But you get to the endpoints, and then lastly, it's going to be really changing the minds of the workers.
Yep.
I think that's not quite so bad because in general, people understand export control restrictions. And so we only hire U.S. persons for the purposes of U.S. export control. So this is really more of a cybersecurity extension of that. So that won't be too bad, but it's like you have to take this training all the way down to the shop floor level. That's not usually the kind of thing they worry about. So
what can to that point, going through those, most complicated pieces of the process, what can either the prime customer do or the government from that side of the ecosystem besides an unlimited budget, because we'd all love that? What could they do to better support a company like Coaxis through this process? If you were able to look at everything you've gone through up to this point, what you may go through going forward, and say this prime customer or the government, on their behalf could be doing these specific things to make us fulfill the mission we actually want to do, and remove some of that friction that comes up for everybody.
Well, I like to dream big. Anybody who knows me, that's my sign off. Dream big. But I got to say, I'm pessimistic that such a thing could actually happen. And that is, the thing is, understand us better. In other words, instead of blind compliance flow downs, and by the way, I recognize they may have no choice. It's just flow it down all the way to the bottom, right? Which means I could have cybersecurity requirement for, a mine somewhere that's, mining ore that goes into the metal, that goes into the, machine shop, the raw material that goes into the machine shop, that goes into my parts, et cetera, et cetera. But if I wave a magic wand and they actually understood us better, and they had the ability to say, well, at some point, this loses its impact. At some point, we're just throwing good money after bad. There is a value level. The higher the value, the more likely this is going to be an issue.
Yep.
As the value goes down for the product or the component, at a say unit value, I won't necessarily say price, but unit value level, there is a point where this doesn't make any sense.
Yep.
My opinion, and I'm wrong about something every day, is that we're at that value level.
Mhm.
But if I could wave a magic wand and the prime customers would understand their suppliers better, then they might be in a position, frankly, to lobby,
Yep.
to support us better, to not spend their own resources chasing stuff they don't need to chase. It only raises their costs to do business. Maybe they don't care because they can pass that on to the federal government. But I care because ultimately the federal government passes it on to me. So if they could do that, that would be huge.
Yep.
But I don't know if they're in a place to do it. I don't know if they can actually do it.
Yep. Yeah, I mean, we're pushing for it, and I know we both are from the different ends of the ecosystem, and they know something needs to change. It's just making that change and taking the actions, where it ultimately comes down. Rubber meets the road. Chuck Coxhead, you're an inspiration. Appreciate you joining us today to share your perspective on the pause and what that means for an organization that is contributing to the defense mission. We're glad to know you. We're glad to be able to share our mindsets together, to be able to propel this industry forward. And looking forward to staying up to date on your story as you go about the certification process and continue to do great things in the defense industrial base. Greatly appreciate your time. And I'm Greg Tomczyk with Valor Cybersecurity. We're going to be along this ride for the next 60 days and beyond to help you keep the record straight. So definitely follow along. And until next time.